In the United States, we use an English system of measurement. Distances are measured in miles, yards, feet, and inches. But the majority of the world uses the metric system and measures distances in kilometers, meters, centimeters, and so forth. Do we as Americans need to know the metric system? Yes, we do. Because of the global economy, many Americans will be using the metric system at their jobs. The metric system is based on some basic units, and then variations of that unit are achieved using prefixes. For example, the basic unit of length is the meter. Let's look at a chart with the metric system. The meter's abbreviation is M, and it has no prefix. A decameter would mean 10 meters. A hectometer would mean 100 meters. A kilometer would be 1,000, and so on. Going smaller than a meter, a decimeter would be 1/10 of a meter. A centimeter would be 1/100th of a meter. A millimeter would be 1/1000th of a meter. And then we even have micro, which is 1/1000th of a meter. And then a nano, which is 1/100000th of a meter. The beauty of the metric system is that it's so easy to convert from one measurement to another. That's because the system is a base 10 system. You know from scientific notation that when you multiply by 10, you move the decimal one place to the right. For example, 1.23 times 10 equals 12.3. 1.23 times 100 equals 123. And so multiplying by tens, hundreds, thousands, millions is just a matter of moving the decimal. Before we get too specific with this system, let's get familiar with the units of measure. In the English system, we have units called miles. The comparable measurement in the metric system is called kilometers. 1 mile is 1.61 kilometers. So a kilometer is not quite as long as a mile. But we know that when we're looking at things that we would normally measure in miles, in the metric system, we're going to be measuring these in kilometers. If you had to drive 60 miles to the nearest town, and if 1 mile equals 1.61 kilometers, then 60 miles equals 96.6 kilometers. Keep in mind that miles and kilometers represent long distances. Long distance runners run 10K races. That's a 10-kilometer race. What about smaller measurements? In the English system, we measure in inches. The comparable unit in the metric system would be centimeters. 1 inch equals 2.54 centimeters. This represents the length of an inch. And this represents the length of a centimeter. You can see a centimeter is smaller than an inch. What about things that we usually measure in yards or even feet? In the metric system, we would measure in meters. A meter is just a little bit bigger than a yard. In fact, if you've seen a yardstick, a meter stick is just a tad longer than a yardstick. We know that 1 yard equals 3 feet, and 3 feet equals 36 inches. Since 1 inch equals 2.54 centimeters, 36 inches equals 91.44 centimeters. So 1 yard is approximately 9/10 of a meter. If I'm measuring the length of a table, I would normally use feet or yards. In the metric system, I would use meters. When you're measuring things that you would normally measure in inches, you measure them in centimeters. And there's a smaller unit in the metric system, a millimeter. There are 10 millimeters in a centimeter. Therefore, the millimeter is a very small unit. If you could imagine about 1/10 of a centimeter, a millimeter is about the length of this mark. We use millimeters a lot in medical measurements or in laboratory situations where you're dealing with very small measurements, and the micrometer or the nanometer would be the units used to measure things that are microscopic. It's important that you know approximately what the measurements would be. In other words, what if I ask you to measure the length of a pencil? What unit would you use? You would probably use centimeters. What if you had a very small insect and you wanted to know how long the body of that insect was? You would probably use millimeters. If you're installing new cabinets in your bathroom, you would measure using meters. And if you wanted to calculate distance from your home to school, you would use kilometers.